She laughed at me as if I were a failure for not having a stable job. Just 3 months later, everything changed dramatically. On that fateful day, I fired her best friend and then everyone else who had supported her cruel jokes. The feeling of power was bittersweet, but the sting of betrayal still burned in my chest. My name is Isadora. Life has its twists and turns, and now it's my turn to have the last laugh. With the weight of my decision still fresh in my mind, I went home feeling a mix of relief and regret. Fernanda's reaction was exactly what I had imagined, a hurricane of indignation that soon erupted. As I walked in, I found her in the living room, sitting with an expression that combined disbelief and anger. "Are you kidding me, Isadora?" she shot back, her voice loud enough for Ricardo, who was in the kitchen, to hear. He emerged, apron still tied around his waist, like a mediator in a dispute that felt like a chess game where all sides had their pieces in motion. "Honey, what's going on?" he asked, trying to ease the tense atmosphere. I wasn't sure if it was the right moment to explain my choice, but I needed to speak up. "I fired Clara and the others. I'm tired of being the punchline, Mom. I can't take it anymore." Fernanda's expression morphed into a mask of contempt. "You think this is going to solve anything? This will only push you further away from your friends and isolate you." I felt the sting of her criticism in every word, as if they were sharp knives slicing through my self-esteem, but I couldn't back down. If I can't count on their support, then what difference does it make? I need to value myself, and this is the only way I found. Ricardo intervened again, seeking a more diplomatic approach. "Let's talk calmly. Isadora, firing people won't change how you feel about yourself." Deep down, I knew he was right, but my desperation for Fernanda to see my worth was overwhelming. Later, Daniel called me, concerned about the situation. "I heard about what happened. Are you okay? You seem really tense." His voice was a relief amid the family chaos. "I'm trying to assert myself, Daniel. This was the only way I found to free myself from my mom's jokes and the pressure I feel every day." He sighed on the other end of the line, showing empathy. "But you can't isolate yourself. People can be cruel, but not everyone is like that. You still have a chance to change this." His perspective was refreshing, a light in the storm that was brewing in my life. "I just wish Fernanda understood that I'm more than her expectations," I replied, my voice trembling. That night, the conversation between my mom and me hung in the air, like a thread about to snap. It was impossible not to feel the weight of unspoken words, and the tension lingered like a dark cloud. I decided that the next morning, I would look for a new job, somewhere I could be seen as a human being, not just as Fernanda's daughter. This new goal gave me purpose, a spark of hope amidst the despair. I tried to focus on this plan, but the image of Clara and the others being fired still echoed in my mind. A growing remorse began to settle in, like an unwanted guest that refused to leave. The next day, I prepared my resume with renewed fervor. The words I wrote felt like a manifesto of my determination and, at the same time, a search for validation. Meanwhile, my relationship with Fernanda continued to deteriorate. She wouldn't speak to me, and when she did, it was only to criticize how I was living my life. Ricardo tried to be the peacemaker, but even he seemed to be losing patience. "Isadora, you need to talk to your mom. Ignoring her won't solve anything," he said in a tone that made me feel guilty, but also determined. I finally decided it was time to face the situation. After an exhausting day of job searching, I sat down at the table with Fernanda. She looked at me with disdain, but there was a vulnerability in her gaze that made me hesitate. "I know you're not happy with what happened," I began, trying to be honest. "But I needed to take a stand. I feel like I can't live in the shadow of your expectations anymore." She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a speech, but said nothing. "If I fail, if I don't get what I want, I'll take responsibility. But I need you to let me try," I continued, almost pleading for her understanding. Fernanda, however, didn't seem willing to budge. Life isn't just about trying, Isadora. It's about results. And so far, you haven't shown anything to prove you're on the right path. My urge to respond turned into a silence that suffocated me. Maybe you're right, I finally replied, getting up from the table. But I can't keep living this way. I felt like the conversation had reached a dead end, and the sadness that settled within me was oppressive. As I walked away, reality hit me. I had distanced myself from my family while seeking an uncertain future. Desperation mixed with determination. And as I walked to my room, I realized that the job search wasn't just about finding work. It was about finding a place where I could be myself. The struggle was just beginning. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in the relentless search for job openings. Each morning started with renewed hope, but soon turned into frustration. The constant clicking of the mouse while browsing job sites became a familiar sound, a digital lament echoing throughout the house. I felt like a ghost, wandering through the walls that had once been filled with laughter and conversation, now only resonating with the tension between me and Fernanda. Daniel, noticing my state of mind, insisted on helping. He started reviewing my resume and even offered to simulate interviews. With each practice session, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. "You have everything it takes to shine, Isadora. You just need to believe in yourself," he said, his eyes full of sincerity. His words were like balm for my wounded soul, and I tried to hold on to that hope. But when I came home, the weight of Fernanda's criticism still hung over me like a heavy cloak I couldn't shake off. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Fernanda, I decided to go out for some fresh air. The cool night air enveloped me as I walked through the streets of my neighborhood, feeling the gentle breeze on my face. It was a fleeting sense of freedom, but at the same time, it reminded me of how trapped I was in an internal battle. The city lights sparkled like stars in a dark sky, and I wondered if it was possible to find a different path, one that would lead me to a place where I could be accepted and valued. As I walked, the idea of a radical change began to take shape in my mind. What if I didn't just look for a new job, but for a fresh start? A place where I could not only be seen, but also be heard. This idea ignited a fire within me, and when I returned home, I was determined not to let Fernanda's expectations define me. I was Isadora, with dreams and ambitions that deserved to be pursued, and I was ready to fight for them. The journey would be long and full of challenges, but finally, I was willing to put myself first. With my heart racing and my mind swirling with emotions, I stepped inside. The atmosphere was charged, as if the air around me was trying to tell me something I still couldn't understand. Fernanda was in the kitchen, her hands busy preparing dinner, but the expression on her face revealed the tension that lingered between us. The silence was deafening, and I knew I couldn't delay the conversation that was about to happen. With each step I took, I felt the need to explain my decision, to justify the rift I had created. But at the same time, a part of me feared her reaction, the inevitable avalanche of criticism that would follow. When I finally gathered the courage to speak, the words came out as a tense whisper. "Mom, we need to talk." She turned to me, surprised, and her expression shifted from mild disdain to cautious attention. "About what, Isadora?" she asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and irony. Her gaze seemed to analyze me, searching for weaknesses, something she could use against me. At that moment, I realized that more than what I would say, how I said it mattered most. "About my decision to fire you and your friends from the company," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. As I spoke, I felt a chill in my stomach, as if an avalanche of emotions had been unleashed within me. Fernanda paused what she was doing, and her reaction was immediate. "You're joking, right? How could you do this?" The disbelief in her voice only fueled my determination. "This isn't a joke, Mom. I need my space, my freedom," I said, trying to remain calm in the midst of the storm brewing in her eyes. "You've always said I should find my own path, so that's what I'm doing." With each word that left my mouth, I felt stronger, as if I were slowly breaking free from invisible chains that had once bound me. She stepped closer, anger rising in her tone. "And you think firing your own mother is going to do you any good? You don't understand the consequences of this, Isadora." Her words were a stab, but instead of intimidating me, they only confirmed that I was on the right path. Ricardo, who had been quiet on the sofa until then, chose to intervene. "Fernanda, maybe we should hear what Isadora has to say," he suggested, trying to be the voice of reason. The look he exchanged with me was a mix of support and concern. I knew he cared about the impacts this decision could have, but it was a step I needed to take. "I can't live in the shadow of your expectations," I continued, my emotions spilling over. "I want to be myself, not what you think I should be. The job I'm looking for isn't just a financial issue, it's about my identity." The intensity of my words seemed to catch everyone off guard, including myself. Fernanda, who had always been so critical, now looked at me as if she were unsure of who I really was. "This is just a phase," she retorted, but there was a hesitation in her voice. A moment of doubt, perhaps? I needed to seize this opening. "It's not just a phase, Mom. I can't be trapped in a cycle of expectations I'll never meet. I have my own dreams and the right to pursue them." The silence that followed was heavy, and I realized I was opening a wound that might never heal completely. Daniel, my friend, arrived at that moment, interrupting the tense atmosphere. He had an easy smile and an energy that seemed capable of brightening any dark space. "Hey, Isadora. Hi, Mrs. Fernanda," he waved, oblivious to the storm brewing. "I was wondering if you wanted to grab a coffee with me, maybe take a walk." The instant change in the mood made me want to both laugh and cry at the same time. He didn't know the tempest that was forming, but his presence was a balm amid the chaos. "Now's not a good time, Daniel," I replied, trying to contain my desire to escape that conversation. But at the same time, the idea of coffee with him seemed like a welcome escape. Actually, I was about to discuss some important things with my mom. Daniel's expression turned serious, and he immediately sensed that I was in a delicate moment. "If you need support, I'm here," he said, a subtle nod of friendship that encouraged me. What I needed now was an ally, someone who understood my struggles and fears. Fernanda, noticing Daniel's intervention, tried to regain control of the situation. "You can't just leave and avoid this conversation, Isadora. This is very serious." Her voice sounded almost desperate, but I knew that what was really at stake was her fear of losing control over me. "I'm not avoiding, Mom. I'm just trying to find a path that makes sense to me," I replied, feeling a mix of freedom and tension. "I'll be happier away from this pressure." I looked at Daniel, who offered me an encouraging smile and a slight nod, as if to say he was with me. As the atmosphere in the room shifted, I realized that this struggle for autonomy would be just the beginning of a new phase in my life. What I wanted was not just a job, but a space where I could be myself, without fear of disappointing anyone. With every step I took toward that freedom, I felt like I was finally beginning to find myself. And so, alongside Daniel, I prepared to leave home, knowing that regardless of what happened, my decision was just the beginning of shaping the woman I wanted to become. The internal battle between my desires and family expectations was far from over, but I was ready to face it. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to subscribe to follow Isadora's journey and the twists and turns yet to come. Now that the decision was made, a mix of relief and anxiety enveloped me. I stepped away from the family lunch, where the tension felt heavier than the food on the plates. Fernanda, with her critical gaze, wouldn't leave me in peace, and every comment from her felt like a direct hit. The idea of firing her, along with the friends who shared the same narrow view of my worth, was, in a way to free myself from the chains she had placed on my feet. Daniel, always so understanding, supported me, but I realized that the shadow of my mother's dissatisfaction loomed over everything. The following days were filled with emotion and reflection. The walls of my small apartment were covered with post-its of goals and deadlines, but what troubled me most was the voice of Fernanda echoing in my head. As I prepared to face the new work environment without their presence, doubts began to creep in. Was I really capable of moving forward without the support I had always known? Or was I just running away from a love that, despite being critical, was still trying to protect me in its own way? When I arrived at the company, the atmosphere was dense. Daniel was in the office with his confident smile, and that gave me a slight comfort. He noticed my apprehension and, with a knowing look, encouraged me to focus on my goals. "You're stronger than you think," he said, and I almost believed it. However, as we gathered to discuss future projects, the echo of giggles and disapproving glances from my former coworkers made me feel vulnerable. I had fired people who, although critical, were also part of my life, and the feeling of betrayal consumed me. The day went on, but my conversations with Daniel helped me understand that this was a new phase. I learned to value my voice, to respect my opinions, and finally, to seek a space where I could shine without the shadow of contempt. Over time, discussions became more productive, and the energy in the environment began to change. I was determined to turn fear into strength. What I wanted most was to prove to myself that I could, on my own, overcome the challenges life imposed on me. However, my connection with my mother did not fade easily. The phone rang, and upon seeing Fernanda's name on the screen, I hesitated. The words she might say still paralyzed me. When I answered, her voice was filled with concern and a touch of anger. "Isadora, do you really think you can do this on your own? You can't just cut ties without considering the consequences." Her words resonated like a sentence, but instead of giving in to the pressure, I stood firm. "I'm trying to find my way, Mom. Maybe you don't understand that now, but I need to do this for myself." The conversation ended in an icy silence, and for a moment, I wondered if the cost of my independence would be my relationship with my mother. The doubt lingered, but I needed to move forward. To do that, I decided I had to keep my focus on work, and Daniel became a pillar, always willing to help with the tasks that arose. As the weeks passed, each achievement, no matter how small, became a personal victory. Fernanda's criticisms began to feel more distant, as if I were building an invisible barrier between us. I learned to like myself, to see my worth not through her eyes, but through my own perception of my potential. Daniel's support was crucial, and our friendship solidified as we faced the challenges of the company together. One morning, as I entered the meeting room, I noticed that the atmosphere was different. The shift in mood wasn't just due to my personal growth, but also to the respect I was starting to earn among my colleagues. One of them, who had always ignored me before, now greeted me with a cordial nod. Recognition was all I needed to fuel the flame of my determination. But on the other hand, part of me still worried about my relationship with my mother. The struggle to gain my freedom was, in a way, linked to the pain of having to leave Fernanda behind. One day, when I returned home, I decided it was time to have an honest conversation with Fernanda. What I didn't expect was to find my father, Ricardo, sitting in the living room with a worried expression. "Isadora, your mom is upset about you. She feels lost not knowing how to help," he said, using the gentle tone he always used to mediate our conflicts. I looked into his eyes and realized that, despite our fights, there was love there, and that gave me courage. Affirming that the conversation would be crucial, I could no longer wait. What I wanted was understanding, a space where I could be heard, without criticism, just support. So I prepared myself to face Fernanda again, determined to show that my quest for identity didn't mean rejecting family, but seeking a place where I could truly be myself. What lay ahead would challenge me in ways I couldn't imagine, but I was ready to face each of those challenges, armed with the determination I had finally found within myself. The atmosphere was heavy when I entered the company's meeting room. My colleagues were seated, murmuring among themselves, and I sensed that the mood wasn't good. Daniel was there, and upon seeing me, his face briefly lit up, but soon dimmed with concern. He stood up, walked over to me, and whispered, "Are you sure you want to do this?" The doubt in his voice reflected not only his friendship, but also concern for what that decision might cause in our professional and personal dynamic. I took a deep breath. The decision was made, and I wouldn't let it shake me. When the meeting began, I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Fernanda's presence was palpable, like a shadow following my every move. What I had done wasn't just an impulsive action, it was an attempt to cut the ties that bound me to a past I wanted to leave behind. With a steady voice, I announced that I was removing Fernanda and her friends from the team. The reactions were immediate. Silence fell, followed by murmurs and expressions of shock. My heart raced, but I maintained my posture. "Isadora, you can't do this," exclaims a colleague. "They're your friends." What I felt wasn't just the pressure of others' opinions, but an avalanche of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a burning desire to free myself from the family ties that suffocated me. On the other, the pain of knowing I was burning bridges I might never be able to rebuild. I was in an emotional battlefield, and every word that left my mouth was like a bullet fired. When I finished, the reactions varied. Some turned away, disappointed by my decision. Others, like Daniel, looked genuinely concerned. He tried to speak again, but I interrupted him. "I know this seems drastic, but for me, it's a matter of survival. I can't keep living under the weight of anyone's expectations." After the meeting, I left the room with a mix of relief and anguish. The walls that once felt so oppressive now seemed a bit more loose. But freedom had its price. Daniel approached me and pulled me aside. "Isadora, you need to make sure that you're doing this for yourself, not out of anger or rebellion." He was right, but a part of me was so tired of feeling belittled and undervalued that any criticism felt like a provocation. The day passed, and as work continued, I couldn't help but think of Fernanda. The image of her, with her disapproving gaze and cutting words, still lingered in my mind. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the tasks I needed to complete, but the idea of how she would react consumed me. By the end of the workday, I decided I needed to talk to Ricardo. He had always been the mediator in our family, the one who tried to keep peace between Fernanda and me. When I got home, he was watching television. "Hi, Dad," I said, trying to hide the tension I felt. He turned off the TV and looked at me with an expression that mixed concern and curiosity. "What happened? You look tense." I sat down on the couch and told him everything that had happened. I explained my decision to fire Fernanda and her friends, and how it felt like a necessary step for me to find myself. Ricardo listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed, bringing his hand to his chin. "Isadora, I understand that you're seeking autonomy, but you need to consider the impact this will have on your relationship with your mom." His voice was calm, but there was a touch of gravity. "Fernanda can be critical, but she also cares about you. It may seem like she doesn't understand you, but often parents are like that." His words resonated within me, and I began to feel a weight of guilt. "I just want her to respect me, Dad. I can't live under her rule forever." Ricardo nodded, but his expression showed that he wasn't completely convinced. "I know it's difficult, but you could try talking to her before making such a drastic decision." Those words sounded like an invitation. A subtle idea began to form in my mind. What if I tried a different approach? Instead of completely distancing myself, maybe it was time to face Fernanda in a way that didn't involve just confrontation. I needed to understand what made her so critical, and, who knows, find a middle ground where I could be myself without losing the connection that still existed. That night, as I prepared for bed, the idea of having a frank conversation with my mom became increasingly tempting. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to try. After all, what was at stake was not only my job, but also my family relationship and my quest for identity and respect. In the days that followed, Fernanda's image wouldn't leave my mind. I was consumed by a mix of anxiety and anticipation. What would I say to her? How could I explain how I felt without it turning into another battle? The idea of seeing her disapproving expression made me even more nervous. But the need to clarify things grew stronger by the minute. When I finally decided it was time to talk to her, I looked for a moment when she seemed calmer. I approached the kitchen, where I found Fernanda washing dishes. The sound of water hitting the ceramic seemed to amplify my nervousness. "Mom, can you stop for a minute? I need to talk to you." She turned around, ready to protest, but seeing my serious expression made her hesitate. "Sure, Isadora, what's up?" Her tone was cautious, as if she were preparing for a storm. I took a deep breath. "About the meeting, I really feel like I needed to do this. It's not that I don't care about you or your friends, I just want space to grow." As I spoke, I noticed her voice was tense, but there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "I just want you to succeed, Isadora, but you need to understand that I'm here because I care about you." What she said, although it sounded like a defense, felt like a plea for help. And in that moment, I realized that the conversation I had feared so much had the potential to become a bridge between us. "I know, Mom, and that's important to me, but I need your trust to move forward. I can't always live in the shadow of what you expect of me." The silence that followed was loaded with emotions. The tension began to give way to something softer. "Maybe I've been too hard on you," she finally said, breaking the barrier that had formed between us. "I just want the best for you." At that moment, I realized we were starting to build a new understanding. It was the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, one where I could be myself without the fear of judgment. And slowly, the shadows of the past began to dissipate, making room for a future where freedom and love could coexist. As the daylight filtered through the living room windows, I felt a little lighter, but the emotional scars were still present. The conversation with Fernanda had been a turning point, but I knew the road to reconciliation would still be long. The determination that had once driven me to act impulsively was now turning into patience. During the following days, I decided to dedicate some time to myself, to think about the choices I had made and the consequences they had brought. Daniel, my friend and coworker, noticed that I was different. He had always been a stable presence, someone who managed to balance his opinions without pressure. One day, while we were having coffee, he mentioned a project at the company that needed new talent. "Isadora, have you thought about applying? It's a great opportunity to showcase your skills," he said, with an encouraging smile. I looked at him and thought about how the idea of a new project could be exactly what I needed. It could give me purpose and, in some way, help restore the confidence I had lost. When I got home that night, I found Fernanda in the kitchen, trying to prepare something that looked more like a culinary experiment than a dish. The smell was a strange mix, but what caught my attention was her expression, a mix of frustration and hope. "You didn't tell me what you think of Daniel's idea," she said, without looking at me, while stirring a pot with controlled enthusiasm. I took a deep breath and, determined, shared with her my intention to apply for the project. To my surprise, a genuine smile formed on her face. "That's great, Isadora. You need to show what you're capable of." The conversation that night felt different, less tense and more collaborative. We started talking about how I could prepare, and suddenly I realized that our relationship was beginning to transform into something more constructive. What had once been a battlefield became a space for honest exchanges. With her support, I created a schedule to review skills I had neglected, and little by little, I began to feel more confident in my abilities. Days passed quickly, and the date for the application approached. I felt excited, but also nervous. It would be a chance to show not just the company, but myself, that I was capable of great things. That morning, before leaving the house, I went to Ricardo's office and asked for his opinion on the project. He always had a balanced view and knew how to calm me down. "Isadora, you have incredible potential. Trust yourself and remember that you don't have to please everyone," he said, looking into my eyes with sincerity. When I finally clicked the submit button on my application, A wave of relief and anxiety washed over me. What followed was an agonizing wait, but I had a new focus. And surprisingly, this wait brought a new dynamic to my relationship with Fernanda. We began to have deeper conversations about our own insecurities and ambitions. She revealed that she had always been afraid of not living up to the expectations she had set for herself as a mother. This made me realize that, in a way, we were fighting similar battles, just in different arenas. One afternoon, while we were watching a show on television, Fernanda turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Isadora, I always wanted you to have a better life than mine. The pressure you feel may reflect the pressure I put on you." That moment of vulnerability made me want to hug her. The acknowledgement of our struggles was an important step toward healing the wounds that separated us. It was no longer about criticism or feeling diminished, but about supporting each other on our journeys. Then the email arrived. I had been selected for an interview. The happiness was instant, but soon it was replaced by doubts. I went to Daniel to share the news, and he, as always, encouraged me to see this as an opportunity for growth. "Remember, Isadora, your journey is unique. Don't compare yourself to others. Just do your best." His unwavering support gave me the strength I needed. The interview came, and I faced it as a new challenge, not as a test to be passed. The room was filled with people, but I knew I had prepared in the best way possible. As I answered questions, every word that left my mouth made me feel more confident. Deep down, I knew I was showing not only my skills, but also who I truly was. After the interview, I returned home with a mix of hope and apprehension. Fernanda was in the living room, and as I looked at her, I realized that we were no longer just mother and daughter, but two women who understood each other at their core. I told her about the questions I had been asked and how I felt during the process. She listened attentively, and when I finished, she said, "Regardless of the outcome, you did something amazing. You challenged yourself." That support was all I needed. Now, with a new understanding blossoming in our relationship, I was ready to face whatever came next. This journey was not just about getting a job. It was about strengthening the bonds that were forming again amid the chaos. Sometimes, you have to go through the fire to find the true value in the relationships you cherish most. And I was willing to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for us. As I walked home, the pressure in my chest seemed to intensify with every step. The decision to fire my mom and her friends still echoed in my mind like thunder, and the weight of betrayal was becoming almost unbearable. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink, but I could barely appreciate the beauty of the scene. What had I done? Had I truly achieved the freedom I so longed for, or had I only opened an abyss between me and those I loved? As I entered the house, the smell of the dinner Fernanda was preparing hit me like a ton of bricks, bringing back memories of times when the kitchen was a place of unity and laughter, not conflict. The mix of spices reminded me of afternoons spent helping my mom cook, laughing and sharing stories about the day. I could hear the clinking of pots, a sound that once comforted me, now felt like a reminder of the pain I had caused. Ricardo was sitting at the table, reading a book. He lifted his eyes, and upon seeing me, immediately sensed that something was wrong. His normally calm expression became a mask of concern. "Isadora, are you okay?" he asked, setting the book aside. "I'm fine," I replied, trying not to seem too shaken. But the truth was, my soul was in tatters. Ricardo had always been the mediator in our family, capable of calming the storms that often arose between my mom and me. I knew he wanted to understand what was going on with me, but I wasn't sure I could articulate everything I felt. "You seem distant. What happened at work?" His voice was gentle, but there was a firmness that encouraged me to open up. I did something that might have changed everything," I confessed, sitting down at the table. "I fired Mom and some of her friends." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Ricardo's disappointment almost like a physical presence. He took a deep breath, his brows furrowing. "Isadora, this is very serious. What led you to make this decision?" The question hung in the air, and I realized that deep down, I still didn't have a clear answer. She never believed in me, Dad, always said I wasn't good enough. I was tired of living in her shadow. Ricardo nodded slowly, as if weighing each word before speaking. I understand that you feel this way, but don't you think you could have found a way to deal with it differently? Firing her can't be the solution, and it might create an even bigger rift between you. I felt like I was in a maze, trying to find an exit, but every corner I turned led me to a new dilemma. I just wanted to break free, Dad. I couldn't take the constant pressure and criticism anymore. That company was my space, and I needed to have control over it. Ricardo let out a slight sigh, as if trying to dissipate the tension in the air. Freedom and autonomy are important, Isadora, but is it possible to achieve them without completely severing family ties? Sometimes the solution is to seek understanding, not separation. I didn't know how to respond. What he was saying made sense, but the emotional wound I carried was intense. Just when I needed support, I was pushing away those who loved me most. Before I could articulate a thought, Fernanda entered the room, her eyes heavy but filled with determination. Isadora, she began, her voice tinged with restraint, I want you to know that I'm disappointed in what you did, but I also want to talk. Her words felt like a bucket of cold water. I was prepared for another argument, another verbal battle, but instead, there was an opening for dialogue. You're willing to listen after what happened? Yes, because I love you, even if I don't always know how to express it in the best way. Fernanda replied, and I saw a trace of vulnerability on her face. Her fragility touched me unexpectedly. And I love you too, even if I acted impulsively, I admitted, feeling the weight on my heart start to lift. I just wanted you to see my potential, to believe in me. She paused, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a slight smile, Fernanda said, You are more than enough, Isadora. Never doubt that. Let's work on this together, if you'll allow me. Those words resonated within me like a gentle melody, and I realized that perhaps this battle didn't have to be won through betrayal, but through dialogue and understanding. Looking at Ricardo, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, as if he could see a new beginning ahead of us. With a gentle smile, I took a deep breath and realized I was ready to take the first step toward reconciliation. The road would be long and challenging, but for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Together, we could rebuild what had been broken, and I could finally find the respect and acceptance I had been seeking. That night, as dinner was served, the atmosphere at the table was different. Words flowed more freely, and between bites of food, we talked about childhood memories, dreams, and how life had always been a roller coaster. Daniel, my friend, who also worked at the company, had texted me earlier. He was worried and wanted to support me. I decided that as soon as I could, I would talk to him. His presence always brought a sense of relief in tense moments. After dinner, while helping to clear the table, Fernanda approached me and hugged me. The gesture was unexpected and left me speechless. The warmth of the embrace enveloped me, and in that instant, I realized there was a new chance for us. Ricardo, watching the scene, smiled with a sense of relief. Let's start from scratch, Isadora, my mom said as she dried her hands on a dish towel. We can find a way to work together, to support each other. What do you think? I nodded, feeling hope beginning to bloom in my heart. I think I'm ready for that. Let's build something new, something better. And so, with a new understanding emerging between us, I realized that it wasn't just about seeking acceptance, but learning to give and receive love, even in the toughest situations.